Good afternoon, everyone. This is Biosafety Now's 17th Twitter/X space, the third one in a row where we've run into technical issues. So I'm not sure what's going on. I'm Bryce Nichols, a professor of genetics at Rutgers University and lab director at the Waxman Institute of Microbiology and one of the co-founders of Biosafety Now. We are a nonprofit organization launched this past February. Our organization is led by an international coalition of experts in biomedicine, mathematics, public health, public policy, law, social science, and public advocacy. And the key thing that holds us together is we're all dedicated to working for a future where scientific research on pathogens supports human life without also threatening it, and public trust in science is restored. So you can learn more about us by visiting our website at biosafetynow.org. I'd also, before I introduce our guest, I want to give a disclaimer that the views of any individual expressed on this and all of our other spaces do not necessarily reflect the views of the entire organization. So a major reason we're having a space today sort of, put together at the last minute in a sense is because there's been a lot of confusion about the events from earlier this week in the U.S. House of Representatives. So as as you know, on Tuesday, there was this sort of there was a lot of activity. Of course, there was the Peter Daszak transcribed interview that happened, but at the same time, there was a lot of finagling with the HHS, the Department of Health and Human Services spending bill in the House of Representatives. And so, surprisingly to myself and many other people that I've spoken with, and certainly I think most, if not all, of the members of Biosafety Now, there were a flurry of amendments that were put into that spending bill. Most notably, the one that made a splash was because of its impact was the one sponsored by Representative Massey of Kentucky and Representative Miller Meeks of Iowa. That calls for a ban on federal funding for dangerous gain-of-function research on potential pandemic pathogens. This was actually covered in Science magazine the next day, with, it set off alarm bells in the, I think, the biomedical community that this happened. And, the questions, of course, are how can this be enforced? What do the words mean? And we'll talk about that today. So because of it being such a surprising, albeit very welcome development for myself and other members of Biosafety Now, who, as you all know, have been pushing for a ban on gain-of-function research that can create another pandemic. It was great that I was able to reach out to and talk to Justin Goodman, that has been working with an organization called the White Coast Waste Project. So he's actually the senior vice president of advocacy and public policy at the nonprofit group White Coast Waste Project. For nearly 20 years, he's led grassroots and lobbying campaigns to stop taxpayer-funded experiments on dogs, cats, primates, and other animals. And since 2020, and he'll be talking about this, giving us the background, him and his organization have been leading investigations and efforts on Capitol Hill to expose and defund EcoHealth Alliance, and also support for the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and more generally gain of function research on potential pandemic pathogens. And it was through these efforts that Justin and the White Coast Waste Project were able to play a pivotal role in helping advance many of the amendments that came out of this past Tuesday, when we'll talk about several of them, starting with the big one, which was the gain of function ban. So, Justin, thank you very much for joining us today to help sort of walk through what happened this week and what this means for the future of gain of function research in the United States and perhaps across the globe. I'd also want to point out that, did I not say, sorry, what did I say white? Did I give a plural there, Justin?
In our title of our organization?
Yeah, did I say, what did I say?
I think you might have said White Coast Waste, but it's a tongue twister. You're not the first person to do that.
Did I say I did? Okay.
Yeah. I was going to let it go, but you brought it up, so here we are.
No, that was wow. That's weird. I apologize, and that was not that really. I'll have to go back and edit that when I post it. But anyway, thank you very much for joining us. So, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how White Coat Waste Project became involved in trying to stop gain of function?
Sure. So, yeah, thanks, Bryce and Justin, for having me. Really appreciate it. I'm a big fan of your work you're doing with Biosafety Now. So, I've been, as you mentioned, working on campaigns to end animal testing for about 20 years. Started when I was in college and grad school at the University of Connecticut. And then since 2007, I've been doing it professionally full time. And for the last 7 years, I've been directing policy and campaigns at White Coat Waste, which is a 3 million member government watchdog group. And we are focused on getting the government out of the animal testing business. And, a lot of people don't realize, I mean, maybe NIH funded experimenters realize this, but most people don't realize that the US government is the single largest funder of animal testing in the world, spending about $20 billion a year just on animal experimentation. That happens in the US, but also abroad. There's over 300 laboratories in foreign countries that get US taxpayer dollars for animal experimentation. And there is an illegal loophole, actually, and this kind of is very relevant to what we're talking about today. There's an illegal loophole that the NIH wrote in to its grant policy statement that completely exempts foreign animal laboratories essentially from any oversight from the NIH, even if they're getting NIH money. We're suing the NIH over that right now. So, we go around doing investigations through the Freedom of Information Act, looking at documents that detail government animal experimentation at home and abroad. And back in 2018, we discovered that there was a USDA laboratory in Beltsville, Maryland, right outside of DC, and this is a true story, I promise. It sounds crazy, but you can go read about it online. There was a USDA laboratory outside of DC that was having government employees go over to wet markets in China and other countries and buy dog and cat meat, fly it home in their carry-on luggage, and then force feed the dog and cat meat to kittens at a lab at the USDA for toxoplasmosis experiments. And then they would kill the kittens, and they killed about 3,000 kittens in this experiment. So we kind of blew the lid off this scandal, shut the project down, and started looking into what else was happening abroad with US taxpayer dollars. So 2019, we start looking into how the NIH is funding labs overseas, and worked with Rand Paul and some other members, Democrats and Republicans, to really drill down into what was happening in foreign labs. And in late 2019, just as the coronavirus, this is pre-pandemic, but the coronavirus outbreak was spreading and becoming international news and a concern that a pandemic might break out, we contacted the White House, and this is December 2019. We contacted the White House and said that we wanted to meet with them about, among other things, NIH funding for animal labs in China, including the Wuhan Institute of Virology specifically. In January 2020, we went to the White House with a friend and supporter named Louise Linton, who at the time, her husband at the time was the Secretary of the Treasury, Stephen Mnuchin, and our president and founder, Anthony Bellotti, and I went to the White House with Louise to talk to them about NIH funding for animal labs in China, and the Wuhan Institute in particular, since the outbreak took place in Wuhan, as we all know. And they listened to us, and then they sent us a cursory thank you afterwards, and we didn't hear anything. And if everyone on here remembers, there was a lot of chaos and confusion and uncertainty and fear in the beginning of early 2020. We didn't know what was happening. The government didn't know as well. We'd come to know the government knew more than it let on at that time. But at least the people in the White House seemed to have no idea what was going on and how the information we brought to them was relevant. So we spent the first few months of 2020 trying to get the attention of Congress and the White House and the media about this link between Wuhan the Wuhan Institute of Virology and the NIH. And it was funny, I was looking back the other day on media coverage from early 2020, and Peter Daszak was all over it as an expert on coronaviruses in China, even bragging about that he and the Wuhan Institute of Virology were longtime partners, had a decade plus, relationship where they were going and doing this work. None of it ever mentioned, of course, that they were doing gain of function experiments, and none of it ever mentioned that it was funded by the NIH. So we're spending the first few months of 2020 trying to get attention for this, and then finally, in the middle of April 2020, we worked with the Daily Mail out of the UK. They now have a US arm, but we worked with the Daily Mail to break the story about how the NIH was funding these risky coronavirus experiments through EcoHealth at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So that was the first time that there was any discussion of the fact that the laboratory in Wuhan might have been culpable for the pandemic, and that they had used taxpayer dollars to fund the experiments that led to the outbreak. A few days later, Donald Trump went on TV during one of the coronavirus briefings and announced that he was cutting the funding for the EcoHealth Alliance grant that funded the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And that's kind of what, I know a lot of people maybe who are listening weren't paying that close, weren't paying that attention that closely back then. Again, there was a lot going on in the world. But basically, since late 2019, early 2020, we're now going into our fifth year of working on this. We've been trying to defund EcoHealth Alliance, the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and gain of function experimentation, both in the US and abroad.
So yeah, I mean, you had mentioned that to me when I talked to you the other day about going with Steve Mnuchin's wife. I thought that was an interesting little side note, that you had that visit. You sort of had that connection to be able. Is that the way you were able to get a meeting at the White House, because you were able to use that connection through.
I think it probably expedited the timeline in which we were able to get into the White House. I mean, we've been doing this a long time. So, White Coat launched its campaigns in 2016. So we have good relationships with with people at government agencies as well as in Congress. So, I think we probably could have gotten a meeting anyway, but certainly having Louise on board helped bump us to the top of the list.
Well, the reason I mention that is because I'm very interested in how what involvement you had in the recent flurry of amendments that just came out, and sort of the interworkings of that from your group, like how you interface with lawmakers,
Yeah.
and suggest various rules or law. How does it actually work? Because I know there's like laws governing like how much you can do as a nonprofit, and those can you sort of go through a little bit of that for the
Sure. Yeah. So I'm the director, the vice president of public policy at White Coat. So I'm our lobbyist. I'm a registered lobbyist. Look me up. And every quarter we report, what we're lobbying on. And I think, as I mentioned to you yesterday, we are the only organization that has been lobbying to defund EcoHealth and gain of function. Currently the only one. There's been a couple that have popped in and out over the years since early 2020. But we're the ones doing the heavy lifting in terms of, rallying public support across the country for these issues, and then getting the issues in front of Congress and having conversations with them about solutions. And that really all started in April 2020 after that first news broke about the NIH funding the Wuhan lab. We rallied over 50 lawmakers to ensure that none of the COVID stimulus money that was being doled out at the time went to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And that was kind of how the whole thing, the defund started. That was after Donald Trump cut the grant, the EcoHealth grant. We wanted to make sure no other money went to Wuhan Institute of Virology. So it's kind of started in 2020. And then in 2021, there was a lot of progress. So basically we go to Capitol Hill and we outline the problem for members. Staffers on Capitol Hill, some of them have 10 different issues in their portfolio. They're being pulled 1,000 different ways. There's lots of lobbyists like me up there trying to get attention for their issues. And White Coat's job and my job is to get to the issue, get the issues to the top of their priority list. And that involves getting our members to send, emails into these offices, make phone calls, show up at town hall meetings, and for me and my team to go to Capitol Hill and have, press the flesh and have in-person meetings detailing what's going on, how it affects this country, and in some cases, particular constituencies and different districts of Congress, different states, and building that grassroots support. And, although it hasn't seemed like it very much over the last
Justin,
4 or
are you
5
there?
years.
I think we've lost you.
Oh no.
No, I can hear you. So
Oh, okay, good.
it might be, I don't know. I heard you, Justin. Maybe the actual main Biosafety Now account has some has some issues.
Okay.
Okay, you can hear me though.
Thanks.
I can hear you. Yeah, and I guess.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's my job, is to get this issue on the radar of lawmakers, and we've been pushing for bipartisan leadership on this since day one. This was never something that we wanted to be a partisan issue, and shouldn't have been, and should not be a partisan issue. As folks who are listening probably know, from 2014 to 2017, gain of function experimentation was essentially, or a lot of it was essentially, banned in the United States due to a decree by the Obama and Biden administration. So, biosafety issues and preventing dangerous experiments that can cause pandemics has never been a partisan thing, but there was a lot of divisiveness in this country that started under the Trump administration, or was exacerbated under the Trump administration, and this issue became polarized, which it shouldn't have been. But we've always been trying to get bipartisan support, and I mean, so what you're looking, we're seeing this. A lot of people are seeing what's happening now in Congress. That's very exciting. Late 2020, almost 2024, but really it started in early 2020, building the support to get where we are today. I mean, throughout 2021, we worked with Congress there. Early 2021, there was a bill introduced to defund EcoHealth Alliance. Early 2021, there was a bill introduced that this is all legislation we worked on, either helped drafting or at the very least helped lobby for. It's their support and passage, and build co-sponsorships on these bills. So 2021, we already had EcoHealth Alliance defund bills, Wuhan Institute defund bills. In May 2021, Rand Paul and Joni Ernst passed amendments in the Senate to defund the Wuhan Institute and gain of function in China. And there was a bipartisan gain of function prohibition bill introduced in late 2021 by Mike Gallagher, Buddy Carter, and Democrat Henry Cuellar. So, this has been a long time coming. What we're seeing happening now is these slow incremental steps are getting these bills introduced to kind of familiarize members of Congress with the concept, with what we're trying to accomplish, and making them comfortable with the idea. And, these standalone bills are kind of like a landing page for an issue. It's like, if a member, they may not be on this funding committee, but if they want to support efforts to get rid of funding for EcoHealth Alliance, they can co-sponsor a bill. So that's what we've been doing for the last 4 years. And then in late 2021, just in terms of some of the highlights of what we've done over the last few years, in late 2021, through the Freedom Information Act, we uncovered the now infamous "This is terrific" emails, basically, that detailed how Peter Daszak and the NIH colluded, I would say, to rewrite the definition of gain of function and allow them to supercharge back coronaviruses in the Wuhan lab. So that was kind of like a watershed moment, because until then, there was a lot of going back and forth about what they did there and what the nature of the experiments they were doing in Wuhan were. And then we had these 2016 emails between Peter Daszak and the NIH and Fauci's staff, specifically at the NIH, saying, we think your experiments in Wuhan are going to run afoul of the gain of function ban. And Daszak said, well, let's basically rewrite the definition of what that means. So that was kind of the first big moment where pretty definitive evidence came out of what they were doing over there. Then through 2022, through last year, we were able to actually enact a lot of legislation, again, that kind of builds towards where we ended up this week. We passed legislation and enacted legislation last year that defunded gain of function in Russia, China, and other adversarial nations. We cut DoD funding to Wuhan Institute, and we cut DoD funding for EcoHealth, any EcoHealth experimentation and any work of EcoHealth in China. So again, incremental steps, kind of getting us to where we wanted to go, slowly tightening the noose on the Wuhan lab, on gain of function, and on EcoHealth Alliance. Then you
So
have this year,
yeah,
beginning of this year. Yeah, go ahead,
can I
please.
get it? So yeah, because I want to, maybe what we could do is I want to start with this week and then go
Yeah,
back, because I'm the real, when you bring up Dashik, I really am very curious to know exactly why none of this seems to be like, how is it possible that he's still, the president of this organization that's getting money? But starting from this week, so this bill you're mentioning, or the amendment that was put in, can you explain exactly how, the basis for that gain of function piece? Because you had several amendments. I mean, there was one, actually a few specific for EcoHealth
yeah,
Alliance, but the one on the gain of function, if you
yeah,
can explain that one, and then I'm going to
sure.
go back to the whole EcoHealth Alliance efforts, which
Yeah,
is just crazy to me. But
of course. Yeah. So every year, the government has to pass 12 different appropriations, so funding bills that fund all the different various federal agencies. So, for example, the State Department, the DoD, and the NIH fund EcoHealth and have funded EcoHealth. And they all have separate funding bills. So every year we work with legislators who are on those committees for those funding bills to get language in them to restrict funding or prohibit funding for programs we don't like and that are dangerous or the taxpayers oppose. This year, in the NIH's funding bill, we were able to get in the base bill. So the bill that Congress wrote earlier this year, there was language that was a complete defund of EcoHealth and defund of gain of function in enemy nations. That was already in the NIH spending bill coming into this week. What we were able to do was work with lawmakers to strengthen the language that was in that bill and turn the enemy gain of function defund into a complete defund of any gain of function being funded by the National Institutes of Health. So
so
again, I mentioned
is that
earlier that it's an iterative process. So this is something,
right?
we started working on these bills in December of last year, getting that language in there, and then the amendment process is where you can tighten things up, strengthen things, and update things depending on the events of the year and the course of how things have gone.
Well, but correct me if I'm wrong, because I was told by somebody who I believe we both know, that this amendment process, this hadn't happened in like 15 to 17 years, where there were the opportunities for lawmakers to sort of put in amendments in the manner that they were put in on Tuesday. Is that not correct? Or it was something about the process in DC changed with the change of the Speaker of the House. Is that
Yeah, so
somewhat
there's been a lot of dysfunction in Congress for anyone who hasn't been paying attention over the last few years, and there's been a lot of situations where appropriations bills did not have the opportunity to go to the floor under regular order and get amended. Sometimes they were rolled up into big omnibus bills that you might hear about. Those are basically massive spending packages where it's all dumped into one big bill that's rushed through Congress and passed just before the deadline, before the government shuts down. And that's happened several times in the last few years. So, yeah, there is not always the opportunity for the process to open up like this. But it did this year. And as soon as it did, we jumped on the opportunity to get whatever we could into these bills.
right? So it actually is. This was the way it's supposed to operate, but prior to at least the events of this last week, it had all happened behind closed doors without a lot of you know public awareness of what sort of things were being traded by one legislator to sort of get support. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, yeah, I think by and large it is. I mean, yeah, often, usually the way this process works is starting at the end of the prior year. I mean, depends again how much dysfunction there is in Congress. Um, the legislators start talking about funding priorities for the next year and what the appropriations bills are going to be, and those are start to be written in the beginning of the calendar year. So early 2023, they were starting to write the bill to fund the government in 2024. And that's when we're talking to legislators about, reminding them what they did the year before and making sure it's included again, or ramping it up and making the language stronger or more all encompassing. Um, and often those bills are kind of quickly passed with very little fanfare or input, especially with regard to specific line items, other than big ones you might hear about, like funding Medicare or Medicaid or abortion riders, or bigger issues like that a lot of people pay attention to. So that is true.
So, what is the likelihood? So, the big question I think everyone wants to know is what's going to happen. Does this have any teeth to it, or is this just performative? Um, Significant, but yet just more of a PR move rather than something that will ultimately wind up in the budget and be enforceable. So, what do you think of that? Where do we
All
go?
good questions. I mean, I wish I had a crystal ball. So right now, Congress passed those amendments. They didn't pass the full NIH spending bill, and they went on recess for Thanksgiving. So they'll be back to work in, I think, 10 days or something like that, or the beginning of December. Technically, they'll probably be back. And then they'll pick up conversations about all of the spending bills. Right now, let's say the amendments that passed this week, that are in the NIH spending bill, even if that bill makes it through the House of Representatives and gets approved, the Senate will then have its version of the bill. The Senate is led by Democrats right now. And then the House and the Senate will come together and negotiate the differences in their bills and then send something to the president's desk. So often what happens is what ends up in the House bill or the Senate bill is not necessarily what will make it to the president's desk, depending on what the issue is and how much support or opposition there is for that. And that's frequently on partisan lines.
So, I guess one question really is, how will we, as members of the public, be actually able to track this? Because sometimes it's very hard to figure out the status of specific little pieces of a much larger bill, right? So, what in terms of what's the next step in us sort of figuring out if this is going to get taken out? Are you saying 10 days from now, when they start to reconvene, we'll see potential movement to modify the language or remove it entirely?
So these amendments are now in the NIH spending bill. They are part of the bill. The next step is that the full House of Representatives, will vote on the NIH spending bill, hopefully. That is the next step in this piece of legislation, is the House voting on the bill.
And can you read the room? I mean, is there any chance that they're going to pass it, given all the stuff that was thrown in?
Yes, it's possible that it'll
Oh,
pass. The problem, the issue that we ran into this week is that there were some, again, there's very close margins right now in the House and the Senate the partisan split. It's pretty small. It's pretty evenly balanced both sides. There's just a few votes you can lose. And what happened on the House side this week is that there were some Republicans who actually thought that some of the funding cuts in the NIH spending bill covers the CDC, the NIH, and as well as Department of Education. It's called the Labor HHS bill. So it's the Department of Labor and all of HHS. So there's a lot of issues besides NIH funding that are being sorted out right now. But there were some Republicans who thought some of the funding cuts were too steep, and then they opposed the bill. So it's possible that they come to terms with what it is and pass it, and then negotiate the differences when the Senate releases their bill.
I see. So I guess one thing, okay, so there's many things, of course, like, one thing I guess I should mention is it is a little, surprising. I guess perhaps I'll take the blame for this, that you and I haven't spoken prior to this week. And I think I actually should explain maybe why, if you think that's useful. You think that's useful? Um,
Go ahead.
I think it is. Well, in part, it's because there. and I actually appreciate this aspect of the space. So your organization, I think, we have a lot of overlapping interests, but we also have some other positions that we would disagree on. And especially given that, the three co-founders of Biosafety Now are NIH funded researchers, I think actually, some of your positions on research we may not necessarily fully agree with. Is that accurate? Maybe I'm not sure. Like if that's the real reason. It's just that it's an interesting dynamic and one that I actually like that dynamic because the fact of the matter is we can talk to one another. Whereas I suspect a lot of, I mean, how many NIH funded researchers talk to you?
A lot of them. Most
Oh,
most NIH funded researchers don't torture animals,
oh,
so
oh,
they don't
I'm
have a
sorry.
problem with
Right.
us.
So actually, that's a good point. So, how much support does your organization actually have in the NIH, like with NIH funded researchers? That's
That's a good
something that,
question. Maybe Science Magazine should do a poll.
well, that okay.
Um,
So the higher ups don't support what you're doing, right? But you're saying on the ground, there's a lot of researchers that are either, you know, maybe even donors, but how many sort of publicly are working with you on
we
these things?
have NIH funded researchers who are on our board of advisors, who are donors to our organization, who meet with us with members of Congress, both publicly and privately. Um, so, yeah, I've never honestly thought of that as an issue.
Well, no, I'm trying to rationalize why we haven't spoken. Or maybe this is just on me. I'll just take the blame for this because we
We're a
should have
wide tent
spoken.
organization. You know what I mean? We don't have to agree with us on everything. I
Oh
mean,
no, no,
there's
yeah,
that, and that's how you win issues, right? Especially in
exactly.
Washington. Strange bedfellows was what makes things interesting and makes people pay attention and moves an issue. Um, that's what that we don't work with other groups that are most of the other groups that focused on animal experimentation are animal rights groups, and by and large they've been pretty ineffective at cracking the code and solving the problem of animal experimentation. So we don't really work with them. We work with other types of organizations where we don't share every we're not on the same page on everything, but where we do share interests in terms of cutting wasteful government spending on particular areas of animal experimentation, even if it's not all of them, like funding labs in foreign countries that are adversarial and hostile to our interests, like Russia and China. Or some people care about cats and dogs, but they don't have a problem with experimentation on rodents. And our organization is Equal Opportunity. We fight to end all taxpayer funded experimentation on animals, whether it's bats or rats or primates or dogs. But not everyone's on the same page, and that's okay. We don't have a litmus test.
Right, and that's actually what I just wanted to make. I think that's important. And one of the things that I actually like about this organization, Biosafety Now in particular, is that we are trying to work with everybody and talk to everybody. And but I did feel, like I said, I think it's a shame that we weren't talking before, but now we are, and I can see a lot of opportunities for collaboration moving forward. And I guess that's what I wanted to ask for you because we've been focused on the state level. Um, Under the understanding that it might be really challenging to get any federal legislation through. But it seems like you're pretty optimistic that we can actually do something at the federal level. Is that? I mean, I know working very hard to make that happen. So, what do you think the prospects are for meaningful legislation at the federal level? Um,
But I think not. I mean, not only have we gotten, we've kind of gotten all the dream bills introduced, right? We've gotten language. We've gotten bills that'll defund EcoHealth forever and defund the Wuhan Institute forever and defund gain of function. And we've gotten incremental wins in the spending bills over the last few years to cut funding from certain agencies to EcoHealth and Wuhan and gain of function. Um, so we've already had a lot of wins. They're not outright, complete defunds wiping, completely decimating the problem. But like I said earlier, they're slowly tightening the noose on these things. Um, and if you look at this year's spending bill, it's no different. I mean, whether you're looking at again, the State Department, the DoD, and the NIH were funding EcoHealth and are funding EcoHealth Alliance. EcoHealth Alliance has gotten $54 million in taxpayer funding just since the pandemic started, including from like weapons of mass destruction accounts
Can
at the
you
DoD.
explain that? So this is okay. Why is that? How is it possible? I know that's a strange, but going back to what you said before, you're saying, you were instrumental in working to get EcoHealth Alliance, out there, get publicity for what it was and what, activities it was participating in, and just, the name, Peter Daszak obviously is the president. Why why is it still operating? How is that possible? I really, to me, I can't what's your rationalization for why the public hasn't demanded that EcoHealth Alliance be shut down forever? Because it really should. I don't. It's sort of it boggles my mind every day that I wake up that EcoHealth Alliance is still a thing and has
Well, I
support.
think the public has demanded it. And I think there's been a lack of leadership at the NIH. And I honestly think it's not going to get any better at the NIH with the new director, who is a supporter of gain of function with potential pandemic pathogens, is a supporter of funding completely unaccountable animal labs in Russia and China and other adversarial nations, and has a lot of other crappy positions that are going to repeat the mistakes of the past. So unfortunately, we can't rely on the NIH to fix this problem. And part of the problem is that, to be totally frank, Democrats in Congress haven't been willing to take action, and it's been a partisan issue. Republican leadership, Republicans have shown a lot of leadership in efforts to defund EcoHealth. I mean, they misspent. The Inspector General's office has found that they broke federal policies. We've documented how they violated federal laws. They misspent money, and they potentially caused a pandemic. And they are richer than ever.
So,
And
what Democratic? Because you said that you've been working in a bipartisan manner. So, presumably that means you've tried to engage Democratic lawmakers, or you've worked
yeah,
successfully with them in the past. What are they just shunning you on this, or are they telling you things off the record? Or I assume they have their marching orders from above. But what's is that just completely off the table that you'll get a Democratic senator or House, someone in the House that will help you in this cause?
so no one has been. I don't think there's a single Democrat who's publicly criticized EcoHealth Alliance. There have been some that have raised questions about Wuhan Institute and gain of function. Brendan Boyle from Pennsylvania has said a few things, and some other members have, pledged to work on this issue. But in terms, when the rubber hits the road, and they have to actually put their name on something, they haven't. When you've seen some of these voice votes happen in Congress to defund Wuhan or EcoHealth, there's been situations where applause broke out, but they haven't been willing to put their names on bills. And a lot of this comes down to Anthony Fauci, to be honest. And he's become this mythical figure on the left, and I think a lot of people feel like criticizing EcoHealth is synonymous with criticizing him in the NIH, and they won't do it.
Yeah, and I think, obviously Richard's on here as a listener, and I know he feels the same way. Maybe then the question, at least for the gain of function piece of this amendment, what can, members of the public and Biosafety Now do to try to help get that, make that come to fruition? Do you have any suggestions? I mean, I know what you're doing, but is there something outside of that that would be helpful? Or
Yeah, go to Find My Representative, the website Find My Representative, and call your member of Congress and tell them that you support the amendments to defund gain of function in the NIH's spending bill.
so related to that, so I don't know. I'm gonna Justin. This is for Justin Kinney. Are you able to speak, Justin? I just want to make sure you're able to, because I know you're listed as a speaker. Are you able? Because I want you to chime in here if you can. And anybody that has any questions, please raise your hand and I'll let you. I'll bring you up here because this is supposed to be very informational. Because as I said at the beginning, I was very confused, and I think a lot of others were too. The language of the bill. It's always the case that the critics of the bans or the regulation of gain of function say that we can't define it, so it can't be regulated. I mean, that's me being a bit of a that's me being cynical, but I do think if we're looking at the language, the current language in the bill, that there may be arguments that make it difficult for it to be um, enforced because they'll claim the language. It still may have um, that as its Achilles heel, so to speak. What are your thoughts on whether the language right now is going to be a problem for enforcement?
I mean, I think this is one of those things where everyone's going to have a different opinion, right? There's, no one even agrees, I think, on what gain of function is. There's very
Well,
few people who
on
do.
a pandemic potential. Well, so I think the
I
first
mean, there's
problem. Yeah.
legislation right now that there's two bills. There's a House and the Senate bill right now that have I think pretty specific definitions. I'd be curious what you and Richard and others think about them. But you know, I'm looking at the House bill right now. Again, it's not as specific as the amendment to the House spending bill is not as specific as this, but the House bill to pause gain of function experimentation says the term gain of function research means any research that can enhance the transmissibility, virulence, or pathogenicity of any pathogen or non-pathogen agent in a way that could result in one or more of the following: the pathogen or agent becoming moderately or highly transmissible, virulent, or pathogenic in human populations, the pathogen or agent causing significant morbidity and mortality, or the pathogen or agent posing a severe threat to public health, the capacity of public health systems, or the national security of the United States.
I,
And then there's and then there's more specific definitions about pandemic pathogens. So yeah, the House amendment doesn't have a lot of detail in, but in some ways it's broader than some of the more specific definitions out there. So it could cover more.
right. Well, I guess that maybe I'm just putting that out there as I think an ongoing
Yeah.
potential issue. One for me, I guess the simplest thing to do would just be to list the thing, like perhaps have a list of 1,000, 2,000 things that should be not allowed. But that might be, I might be in the minority in terms of wanting to propose that. I do think the way it's been the obfuscation from the critics to claim that like the law will cover all of biology. um, I'm not sure that'll ever go away necessarily, but there is some, it's useful to at least, listen to that critique to perhaps find language that ultimately does work. I guess one question I also have is this: is there a force of law with respect to this? Um,
Yes.
okay, so what's the punishment if you violate this? I
Well,
didn't.
there's no penalty. I mean, this just prohibits funding.
Prohibits funding. Okay, but there's no like like if you do this in spite of the law, if you do gain a function, there's no penalty for it.
No, this is to prevent the problem from happening in the first place, or prevent the agencies. But there's no penalty as like a criminal penalty.
Right.
Is
Okay.
what you're. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. I mean, I guess this is perhaps for a larger discussion, but I the way learning from the past, of course, is instructive. And as you mentioned, there was that pause from 2014 to 2016, and during that time, still they found ways to allow that research to proceed. And I do think one of the reasons you get people, bad actors looking for loopholes is because there's no, force of law, actual criminal penalties if you violate the law, But
Yeah. I don't
uh,
disagree. I mean, I'd love criminal penalties for a lot of these things. Um,
we do love the criminal penalties. I like it.
but that's, but I mean, the appropriations bill probably wouldn't be the place for that. But in terms of, because the appropriations bills are related specifically to funding. Um, so that's a different conversation about a standalone bill that says this is absolutely prohibited, and if you do this, X, Y, and Z is going to happen to you.
Okay.
That's different than a funding bill that just dictates how money can or can't be spent.
So I did. Okay. Now I want to ask you about the Colorado State issue. Can you explain that? Because there's this. I know that was in the news perhaps 5 months ago, but it came up a lot. There was a lot of publicity about the funding for a bat lab to be built at Colorado State. Can you explain that and what happened? You also had an amendment to stop funding for that, correct? Oh,
We
you
did.
didn't have
It's
an
not.
amendment for that.
No. Um, U.S. Right to Know did some great research over the last few years, and among the things that came out of their work was details about this planned bat lab at Colorado State University. We started digging in and submitting records or additional records requests to both Colorado State University directly and the National Institutes of Health for more details about the project. And then, which was first funded in 2021. But it turns out that since basically 2018, Vincent Munster at NIAID, EcoHealth Alliance, and Greg Ebel and Tony Schouts at Colorado State University have been scheming to build this bat lab at Colorado State. It's a breeding colony and experimentation lab that will be the hub for bat experiments in the United States and provide bats to other laboratories, including NIAID's Rocky Mountain Lab in Montana. The plan right now for this project, and the reason it's in the news again now is because we got additional documents with more details about the project, and because in September of this year, the NIH gave them another $1.7 million towards the construction of this new bat breeding and experimentation facility. So far, the NIH has given $8.4 million to the construction of this new bat lab on U.S. soil in Colorado, and Colorado state taxpayers have given, I think, maybe over $10 million to it as well. But the plan here is to import hundreds of horseshoe bats and flying foxes, another breed of bat, from Bangladesh. These are animals who are reservoirs for things like Nipah, which is an incurable, deadly disease that we probably don't want here.
My favorite, by the way. I love the Nipah studies. That's
Yeah.
Big
So
fan of Nipah. Yeah.
They're going to import hundreds of these bats, and then taxpayers are going to be forced to fund more experimentation on the bats that we built the lab for. Some of these experiments are going to be taking place in conjunction with the Rocky Mountain Lab and Vincent Munster at NIAID, who's been a big champion of it, and who will be conducting not only Nipah experiments on these bats, but Ebola virus experiments on the bats as well.
So this is okay. So one of the things I guess that's been a little confusing about the stories that have emerged about the plan is, I believe, so there's been I think the public is a little confused about the location where Nipah and Ebola are going to be used, because my understanding is it's not at Colorado State, correct? It would be at Rocky Mountain Lab. Although, to be fair, EcoHealth Alliance is involved, so you never know. But still,
Yeah.
isn't the location of the Nipah and Ebola studies supposed to be at the BSL, one presumes, 4 laboratory at the Rocky Mountain Labs? Correct? Is that correct?
Yes, based on what we know, we're trying to get more documents now. But the problem is that folks at Colorado State University are doing a lot of hand waving to make it seem like what they're doing is harmless, and they're going out and saying that we're absolutely not going to be doing any experiments with COVID or Nipah or Ebola virus. And actually, that's exactly what the bats are being imported for, and that's exactly what their grant application says. Now,
Right.
It's not clear whether it's going to be happening at Colorado State or in Montana at NIAID at the Rocky Mountain Lab. But one amendment we did get in the NIH spending bill was cutting funding for gain of function at the Rocky Mountain Lab in Montana, just in case.
Well, but it doesn't matter. Well, I guess gain of function is one thing, but just the study of Nipah is another.
Yeah.
Because I think, and we have talked about this at least, internally, but it's a whole other question about how much Nipah research is needed
Yeah.
And whether it's needed at all. And I think, some of the people in the group, I think, feel that really the U.S. should not be funding NEPA research. Certainly funding it here seems a bit, reckless. As you said, well, how many people, 100 people or so die each
Yeah.
year is it, I'm not sure exactly what the real threat is to having NEPA ever, be a threat to people in the United States. That being said, it is, I'm not saying we shouldn't try to cure diseases in other countries, but the fact of the matter is having something so dangerous, bringing it into the States, studying it here, and potentially weaponizing it is, I think, perhaps both you and I think is the real. I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but it does give the appearance that we're trying to develop NEPA as some sort of potential, for either defensive or, well, I guess for defensive, biodefense, I guess
Well,
is
I
the
think you're
term.
getting right to the core of why EcoHealth Alliance has continued to be funded for despite what happened in Wuhan,
Yeah.
and why the Department of Defense is the single largest funder of EcoHealth Alliance.
Well, and so to that point, is this at some level, if it is a Department of Defense thing, is there any way to actually have it fully stopped?
That's a great question.
Well, I'm wondering, maybe you know more than I do, because I assume, do you talk to people, close to the Department of Defense, or?
I mean, I don't talk to people. I don't talk to people who are close to the Department of Defense, but I do talk to people on the House and Senate defense committees, the armed services committees who deal with the DoD. And I mean, those legislators have advanced legislation to completely defund EcoHealth Alliance, and to defund gain of function.
But so this is actually one question I kind of have for everybody that's the lawmaker. Do you oppose the U.S. developing bioweapons for offensive purposes? That's the question, I think, is just on like moral grounds. Do you actually oppose that or not? Because it's sort of like a question with respect to like nuclear capabilities. Like, I suspect most lawmakers would oppose the U.S. just getting rid of all of its nuclear weapons. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think most lawmakers would oppose a proposal like that.
But then you're saying, would they also then say, well, we don't want to get rid of our ability to create biological weapons in the same fashion, right? So making the
Well, I
parallel
think,
between.
yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying. So to me, I'm trying to understand the logic of lawmakers right now, because it does seem like they reach a point where they're not willing to kind of go the next step. And I'm wondering if it's simply because at the end of the day, they do think the U.S. should have some, actual bioweapons programs that can't be called that because, of course, it's illegal to have
It's illegal,
bioweapons.
right?
So we have biodefense programs,
Yeah.
so I don't
Well, I
know.
mean, I think that, I think looking at what happened in Wuhan and the kind of the circumstances surrounding that is kind of a great example, right? Like, why would a CCP run lab in Wuhan accept US involvement in a project to supercharge coronaviruses that are easily transmissible and more deadly? I mean, that seems like a situation where you're kind of, it's a, mutually assured destruction if things go wrong.
Correct, but they do. I mean, there are. I mean, I think people do also believe that there are, like basic science questions to be addressed by doing these experiments. I sadly, I think that there are a lot of scientists that don't really consider the actual implications as potential bioweapons agents.
Well, I mean, I think that's the fundamental difference between the analogy about, the fundamental problem with the analogy between nuclear weapons and bioagents, right?
Yeah,
Nuclear weapons, you can't, difficult to kind of smuggle around,
right.
and there's not no one's actually going to accidentally launch a nuke. I think it's unlikely. But bioweapons are a whole different story. Lab acquired infections, accidental lab leaks, intentional, malpractice. It's way easier, way harder to detect. And I mean, look at what happened in Wuhan again. I mean, we still don't know exactly what happened because it's hard to retrace your steps. So, I think those two situations are a little different. I think most people think it's insane to take natural viruses and engineer them to be more dangerous to people. Not everyone thinks that. There's probably people in the defense community who think it's a great idea. I mean, Rocky Mountain Laboratories, NIAID's Rocky Mountain Lab has a long history of bioweapons development.
Yeah.
There's really creepy pictures of them uh, with lining up ticks and
Oh,
putting
yes.
lime into them. So
Yes, I am aware of those photos.
yeah,
Are incredible. We are hoping to have Chris Newby on a space at some point in the near future to talk about that. And of course, the hashtag Lime Truther has been spreading. No pun intended. Um, I am a big fan of the Lime Truther. You know, the attempt
yeah.
to use that as an insult, but yeah, I do think there is this, of course, history of bioweapons research, but the question then becomes, where do we go from here? Although I did forget one of the amendments. The other amendment you had, right? It was a $3.5 million. That was like a cutout for EcoHealth, correct? You were involved in. I forget.
So
I didn't
that
mention
was
that one.
yeah. So Congressman Pfluger from Texas did that. So there's two EcoHealth specific amendments in the NIH's spending bill that came out this week. One specifically cut funding for two EcoHealth projects. One is the project that funded the Wuhan lab originally, and then another project where they're doing virus hunting and animal experimentation with Nipah and other viruses in Bangladesh. It cut funding for those two specific projects. The other amendment, Representative Pfluger's amendment, was a fun one. We actually didn't have anything to do with this other than lobby. Once it came out, we were urging lawmakers to support it. Was an amendment that cut the office of the director, the NIH director's office budget by $3.7 million, basically to recoup the money that NIH gave EcoHealth for the grants that funded the Wuhan lab. It's kind of a punishment that not only are they getting their ass handed to them in the press and these other amendments are happening, but we're also going to start docking your pay for stupid funding decisions you made, which I think that's ultimately what we want to happen. There has to be some kind of pain involved for these agencies to get them to do the right thing. And there's been very little accountability. Now, $3.7 million is a drop in the bucket for the NIH. They're going to have a $50 billion budget this year. But it does show that there's some consequences for your actions, at least until, Fauci gets charged with perjury formally, which may or may not ever happen.
Yeah, well, that's another issue, I guess. With respect to that, because I thought that was quite interesting to have this amendment to specifically remove a chunk from the NIH budget. Given your interactions with lawmakers, is there what is your sense on the support more broadly for the NIH? Is it as strong as ever, and they're just trying to figure out ways to kind of clean up the bad actors, or is there actually any threat to the NIH as an entity because of the behavior of certain bad actors in positions of power? My personal thought, I've thought that this is a very scary time in terms of actual support to completely defund the entire NIH if this keeps going on. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just overreacting.
Well, I mean, part of the problem with the bill, one of the reasons that stalled the bill this week is because that the proposed cuts to NIH were too steep for even some Republicans. So they'd already lost Democratic support, but even some Republicans weren't willing. More moderate Republicans weren't willing to go along with it. The
I think
situation
there is.
with gain of function and Fauci and EcoHealth Alliance hasn't helped. I think that hasn't helped the NIH's cause, obviously. It's certainly helped the cause of holding NIH accountable and, rallying support for dangerous and wasteful programs that hurt animals and place national security at risk, which is my concern. So, from my perspective, this is a long time coming for the NIH. They've been wasting so much money on stupid crap for a long time. and their
Hold on, did you
budget
read?
is so bloated, and I don't think
You,
taxpayers are really getting a bang for their buck.
are you're making fun of my grants now? Is that what you're doing? I
Well,
think
I
you
didn't look into your
did.
grant specifically, Bryce, but I don't
Uh,
think you're putting turtles on treadmills or anything.
well, no, that's true. Well, of course, yeah. And as I discussed with you, I work with bacteria and haven't done any. I did tell you that embarrassing story of my one animal experimentation, but I won't share that with others. I did want to ask if anyone has any questions for Justin. Please raise your hand. I don't know if I'm trying to cover anything that might be of interest to people because I was getting a lot of questions about what does this mean. Do you
So
maybe?
basically, yeah, I mean, if we want to kind of recap where things stand right
Yeah.
now with funding for gain of function and EcoHealth and all of that. The three main funders of EcoHealth and gain of function were State Department and NIH and DoD in some regard. The State Department bill for 2024 defunds the Wuhan lab. It completely defunds EcoHealth Alliance and all gain of function experiments. The DoD's spending bill for next year defunds EcoHealth Alliance and the Wuhan lab completely. And now the NIH bill that will soon be voted on, hopefully, completely defunds gain of function, completely cuts NIH funding for EcoHealth, and as we discussed, it docks some money for the NIH as well. It also actually cuts money for all labs in Russia and China. It's really not going to be for until the end of the year, and probably even till after into early 2024 until we know what's going on, because the president just signed another extension into law, so that Congress has a little more time to sort out the budgets for the spending bills for next year. So it'll
Okay.
be a few weeks before we have any updates on any of this, but it probably won't be until early next year when we see what makes it to the president's desk, if anything.
Okay, so then I guess, so perhaps, I mean, if nobody has any questions, I'm going to let you go because I want to ask you one final thing because I think it would be very useful if you could sort of check in on this. Would you be willing to kind of do multiple spaces, like just to check in on these issues, like to keep us updated and keep people informed? Because I think this insider knowledge is extremely valuable, certainly to us, and I think to people. Hopefully, the space won't collapse, but are you willing to sort of help us as we move along to explain the legislative piece on the federal end?
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime. I mean, people can, on Twitter, people logged in, see what my tag is here, Justin R. Goodman. They can DM me or just comment on tweets. I'm pretty active on
Yeah,
Twitter in terms of sharing updates. As these amendments were being passed the other night, I was kind of live tweeting it. That's how most people heard about these.
yeah.
Um,
They
so
they had
if
questions. The weird thing is like it even they could read the words, but everyone's still confused. Like, how did this happen? Where did it come from? I think nobody was prepared for it. That was, I guess, I certainly wasn't because I was just focused on the Dazic transcript, so I wasn't aware that there was Massey was gonna come out with a ban on gain of function. That was quite a shock.
Yeah, well, the thing is that those amendments were all released, publicly at least a week, maybe two, maybe a week, at least a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago.
So who covered those? Like, how did? Well, I can.
So, I mean, so
I missed
basically,
them. Yeah.
they open the bills for amendments, and then members submit, the members of Congress submit the amendments they want to see. Then there's a committee that says, okay, these amendments that you submitted comply with the rules of Congress
Okay.
for this particular bill. Then, once they decide on whether the amendment complies with the rules, then they send the amendment to the House, and then members start to debate and vote on them.
I see.
So it's a process that takes a few weeks from the drafting and submission of the amendment. Those pop up on one of the congressional websites. You can see where all the amendments are. There's hundreds of them. For the NIH bill, there was over 300 amendments submitted.
Right. I did see. Yeah, I saw some of the ones.
And then a lot of those are going to, the rules committee is going to say those are not in order. This is not the appropriate bill to have that amendment in, or you wrote it the wrong way, or it runs afoul of the rules in some way. Then they pick the ones that do comply. Then those are the ones that go to the House floor, and people have 10 minutes to debate their issue, and they hold a vote. And then some of those amendments, if they're non-controversial, they get a voice vote. which is, you and Bryce and I, Bryce, you and I were talking about that the other day. A voice vote
Yeah.
is, they say, the ayes and the nays, and people just kind of yell out into the open, and whichever is louder carries the day. But when there's a controversial amendment, for example, they will have a tallied vote where every member has to vote individually, and they want a record of who voted for and against it. Now, I want to mention this because I think it's important, is the amendments we're talking about related to EcoHealth and gain of function were all done by voice vote, indicating that even the Democrats did not resist them, because the Democrats had the power to say, we basically want to count the votes on this, and we want to hold accountable the people who voted yes or no, or whichever way. That didn't happen on these amendments. On a lot of other amendments, there were recorded votes, but not on these particular amendments.
Are you saying Democrats were actually in the room and didn't say anything?
Yes.
So
Not a
wait.
single person stood up and opposed them.
Well, doesn't that mean that they approve? Because isn't
Yes,
that
that's why I
silent
say they were
consent
passed
by silence?
unanimously.
Well, right, but I actually thought that meant nobody was in the room. You're saying that people were
Well, it doesn't
present.
mean nobody was in the room.
Oh,
There doesn't have to be a full Congress in the room, but there are members on both sides in the room, who either have their own legislation there, or who are just there to vote and do their civic duty and
I
be
see.
involved in what's happening.
So in theory, they're on record as supporting the defunding of EcoHealth. Is that not
Correct.
fair?
That is
Okay.
correct.
So I just need to know the list of the names. No, I will. I'll take that as a positive, but I think as you said, it would be worthwhile for us to make sure that we're trying to rally support through writing the legislators, which is good. We can try to I guess
And
the
this is,
time.
and
Yeah.
despite what, I think people, especially in lab leak world, we get caught up in a lot of the weeds on these things. But the
Hold on.
truth is
Are you referring to the group chat that we're part of? I
oh
was.
no, I'm just talking
No.
about in general.
Oh,
In
okay.
general, I think we're talking about these individual grants and NEPA, and did they ship live animals or viruses, or real technicalities on these things. When it comes down to it, when you ask the public what they think about these things, here's what the polls say. These are independent polls. Polls show that overwhelming majority of the public believes that a lab leak in Wuhan caused the pandemic. Polls by Harvard and Politico and other independent sources have found that. Polls also show that a majority of the public opposes gain of function experiments with pandemic pathogens that can cause an outbreak. So part of the problem is that, we need to get, everyone has to be loud about this. You can't just care about this and expect Congress to do the right thing. Often Congress does the wrong thing. So overwhelming amount of support to be coming in to Capitol Hill, phone calls, emails, whatever, tweets at members of Congress, letting them know that you support this effort. Whether it's to protect animals from being abused in labs, or protect national security, or prevent dangerous experiments, or all of the above. That's what my organization does, is gives a platform to people across the country who pay taxes and have a right to know how their money is being spent, and have a right to have a say in how their money is being spent. And when you look at polls, this is a uniting issue. Virtually every issue we work on is a uniting issue. There isn't a real partisan divide when it comes to these different animal experimentation issues, whether it's gain of function, or cats and dogs, or primates, or whatever the case may be. So there's a lot more agreement on this than there appears to be if you pay attention to lab leak Twitter, and you're dealing with some of these insane virologists who are stupid and sociopathic and want to do experiments that could wipe out humanity. I mean, they're in the very, very, very vocal minority, and even though places like Science and others give them a platform, most people disagree with them strongly. And I think the fact that these amendments passed this week and have continued over the years to pass, and stronger iterations of these pieces of legislation have gotten to the president's desk and signed into law, indicates that they're ultimately going to lose.
Well, I hope you're right, and certainly I'm glad that I finally was able to connect with you, so that hopefully we could help out in some way, because you're doing very, very great, very important stuff on Capitol Hill. in a way, I know that you're posting stuff, but still, it seems like it's in a way a little bit under the radar, right? But perhaps it's just I don't know that I
Well, you know, I mean,
weird,
this
right?
Twitter space is kind of like a perfect example. Like, it's complicated stuff, and
I
and
know,
I don't
yeah.
mean that. And even to me, it is. You know, it's not straightforward, and it's hard to communicate every little step along the way to people. And also, it's confusing because it's like when the language gets put in the bill, and then the language passes the subcommittee, and then the language passes the full appropriations committee. But then that's not the end. Then it has to go to the full House, and then the Senate has to do its thing. Then they have to meet again with the House and the Senate and negotiate differences. Then maybe it gets to the president's desk. Maybe it gets vetoed. Maybe it never sees the light of day. And it's like at some point it's confusing for people.
Oh, it's well, I think by design, but
Yes.
I guess that's where no, that's why I had said that I would really appreciate if you could
Yeah.
do,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking even like legislative check-ins or something because this is I now that there's movement, with these amendments in the budget, I think it would be really useful to know, at least get updates. I mean, I certainly will be reaching out to you at least privately, but if you want to communicate more to the public, and like I said, I'm actually kind of surprised there aren't any questions given,
I
maybe
know.
either you did a great job
Or a terrible job.
or a terrible job. You never know.
And everyone's confused.
Yeah. Well, okay, and I don't know. I'm worried. I have given scientific talks before where nobody asked a question, and that
Yeah.
you you know
I see a thumbs up. Someone thumbs it up, but
oh, okay.
maybe
Well,
they're
fair
thumbs
enough.
upping that they're confused or thumbs up that they like. You know,
I don't
that's
know.
also ambiguous.
But anyway, I do appreciate you coming on, and I guess I'm gonna just go ahead and wrap it up if there's no questions, and because I hope we can do some stuff in the future. And I think actually I know we will. But thanks a lot for taking the time out to talk to us about this issue, and good luck. And let me know if there's anything that would be of use, at least for Biosafety Now, and then we should do this again.
Yeah, I'd love to. I can keep you posted, Bryce. I mean, obviously, I post on Twitter, but I can keep you posted specifically when votes and things are coming up. So
Yeah, I'd like to know like that kind of because I was just taken by surprise. That was quite pleasantly surprised. But yeah, it was very, you know, that's the thing. It's a great job, frankly. I mean, I don't know what
no, I listen. This is all a result of the good work that your group is doing. That everyone who's been working on this issue in their own way has been doing. You know, there's Drastic. Shout out to Drastic. Shout out to Biosafety Now. Shout out to my colleague Daniel Lopez, who's he's our researcher who's dug up a lot of the dirt. The patient zero stuff with Ben Hu that came out earlier this year. We had the documents tying Ben Hu as patient zero to the NIH funded gain of function experiments. My colleague Daniel is the one who exposed that and got those documents from the government. US Right to Know is doing great work. It's really a group effort. We're the ones that are on Capitol Hill lobbying. But there's a lot of great advocacy and research and reporting being done, like by Emily Kopp and people outside of Lab Leak World too, who've been covering this issue. So it's a group effort. I'm really grateful and proud to be working with so many awesome people at White Coat and other groups like you guys. And I'm really proud of the progress we're making. I mean, none of this would have happened if we weren't making all this noise. All of our groups and all of us, working on this issue. So. Yeah, keep up the great work, everyone. Do follow me on Twitter. Follow @WhiteCoatWaste on all the social media platforms. You'll learn about all kinds of different stuff the government is doing to torture animals, not only gain of function, that we're trying to stop.
Yeah, well,
and
right. I don't know. Some of the photos might be a little bit disturbing, I will say. But I guess
maybe we try to keep that stuff to a minimum. And try to keep stuff, cartoony and a little lighthearted. We don't want to scare people away, but we've been making a lot of great progress on, this and other issues. And these are great bipartisan issues that in such a divisive time in this country are uniting issues where most people agree that there should be limits on what experimentation should be done and can be done with our money. And yeah, I'm thrilled to be an advocate and a mouthpiece for them. So thanks, everyone. Follow me, follow White Coat, and keep up the great work, and I'll keep you posted.
Yeah, great. All right. Thanks a lot, Justin. And take care, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And I guess we will have another space. Actually, I think we will have another space soon. And we will look forward to hearing what's going on with Justin's progress in DC. This is great. So take care, everyone. Have a good weekend.